On a stormy evening that cloaked the city in shadows and rain, the wealthiest man in town stepped into Meridian, dressed like a pauper. Elijah Morgan's coat was torn at the cuffs, his shoes worn thin and scuffed by time. To the opulent guests dining under crystal chandeliers, he was invisible, or worse, a stain on their perfectly polished evening. Laughter simmered at the edges of the room as Cassidy Rowe, the restaurant's icy owner, exchanged a smug glance with her head waiter. Dean Whitaker, tall and slick in his tailored vest, strode forward with rehearsed disdain. "The shelter's 5 blocks east," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the clinking glasses and piano notes like a blade. The room snickered. Only one person didn't join in the mockery. Alina Brooks, a young server with eyes full of quiet strength, watched in discomfort. As others sneered, she stood still, heart-tugging at the injustice playing out in front of her. The old man, Elijah, remained unmoved. His posture was upright, his gaze steady. They couldn't see the brilliance tucked behind his weathered face, the calm authority resting behind those watchful eyes. And what they also didn't know, what none of them could possibly guess, was that this moment, this cruel dismissal of a man they believed to be beneath them, would define the rest of their lives. The next day, the same mouths that laughed would fall silent. The same eyes that looked down on him would widen in disbelief, but by then it would be too late. Inside, the restaurant gleamed. Meridian was the city's crown jewel, a cathedral of wealth masquerading as fine dining. Glittering cutlery reflected soft golden light. Fashion moguls dined beside tech billionaires. Celebrities whispered from behind oversized sunglasses, desperate to be noticed while pretending not to be. Cassidy Rowe, the architect of this temple to exclusivity, floated from table to table in a designer dress, her smile as practiced as a politician's handshake. She leaned in close to a Hollywood producer, purring compliments about the duck confit. Behind closed doors, however, her mask slipped. "Dean!" she snapped in the corridor. "Table 7's still waiting on their second course." Dean Whitaker adjusted his already perfect tie, exuding charm like cologne. "On it, Ms. Rowe," he replied smoothly before turning and intentionally shouldering past Alina. "Watch it!" he barked, though she hadn't moved. Alina bit her lip and kept silent. She couldn't afford to lose her weekend shifts, not when every dollar counted. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Chef Marcus Tate moved like a symphony conductor. The scallops sizzled under his skilled hands, plated with care only a father fighting for his daughter's life could muster. Riley, his 8-year-old, lay in a hospital bed, waiting for a surgery they couldn't afford. He checked his watch. 3 hours until close. Then maybe he could call the hospital again and hope for a miracle. Out in the lavish dining room, the front door chimed. Every sound seemed to hush for a moment as the maitre d', Dennis Shaw, turned and saw the figure standing in the entryway. Rain dripped from the edges of Elijah Morgan's overcoat. His slacks were threadbare, his sweater full of tiny holes, and he leaned slightly on a plain wooden cane. In his other hand, he carried a weathered plastic bag. Dennis's polished smile faltered. He moved quickly, placing himself between the man and the rest of the guests. "Sir, I believe you may be lost," he whispered, his voice tight with tension. Elijah offered a gentle smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm exactly where I meant to be," he replied with perfect diction. "I'd like a table, please." The maitre d' blinked, caught off guard. The man may have looked like he'd walked out of a storm drain, but his voice, deep, articulate, commanding, belonged to someone of influence. Whispers rippled through the dining room. A woman at a nearby table ostentatiously pulled a napkin over her nose. Another elbowed her date, pointing. Behind the bar, Cassidy Rowe emerged like a general surveying the battlefield. Her sharp eyes took in the situation, then flicked to Dean Whitaker. With a nod, she issued her silent command, "Get rid of him." Dean approached like a wolf circling prey, wearing that signature smirk that always made Alina uneasy. "Can I help you?" Dean asked loudly, ensuring the surrounding tables could hear. The homeless shelter is 5 blocks east. This is a fine dining establishment. Elijah turned to face him, unbothered. Yes, I know, he said calmly. That's why I came. I'd like a table for one. A few chuckles erupted. Dean grinned wider, playing to the crowd now. I'm afraid that's not possible, he sneered. We have a strict dress code. He looked Elijah up and down with dramatic disgust. And you clearly don't meet the standard. I have money to pay, Elijah replied, reaching into his coat pocket. Dean scoffed. Even if you found a 20 on the sidewalk, our cheapest appetizer is $60. Now, why don't you head back to wherever you sleep and save us all the headache? The laughter grew louder. One man near the back even pulled out his phone, recording. From her post near the bar, Alina's stomach twisted. She couldn't watch anymore. Sir? She said softly, stepping forward, ignoring Dean's glare. Would you like me to call you a cab? It's coming down pretty hard out there. Elijah turned to her, eyes kind. That's very kind of you, young lady, but no, thank you. I came to dine. Dean snorted. Dine? Here? I can afford whatever's on your menu. Oh, I'm sure. Dean chuckled darkly. You probably flew in on your private jet. Cassidy, clearly amused, finally stepped in. Dean, walk our guest out, would you? Maybe hand him one of yesterday's rolls for the road. But Elijah didn't budge. Instead, he turned slowly to Cassidy. Miss Rowe, isn't it? You're the owner? She blinked, startled. I make it my business to know where I'm dining. Elijah continued, his voice still even. And if first impressions mean anything, I'd say yours has left quite the mark. He scanned the room, the laughing faces, the judgmental eyes. You might want to reconsider how you treat your guests, he said. Things, he added, aren't always what they seem. The door to Meridian swung open once more as the storm outside raged, ushering in a gust of cold wind, and with it, a man who seemed woefully out of place. He was old, black, and stooped. His coat was threadbare, his shoes cracked and waterlogged, and in one hand he clutched a flimsy plastic bag. With the other he leaned on a weathered wooden cane. His presence brought a pause to the orchestration of elegance that was Meridian's dining room. Dennis Shaw, the maitre d', instinctively tensed and darted toward the entrance. The last thing he needed was a scene. Sir, he said in a hushed tone, glancing nervously over his shoulder. You might be more comfortable elsewhere. There's a shelter a few blocks east. But the man didn't flinch. His eyes, soft yet unwavering, met Dennis's. I appreciate your concern, he said in a voice rich with calm authority, but I'm exactly where I intend to be. I'd like a table, please. His diction was flawless, deliberate. It startled Dennis. This wasn't the mumbling of someone confused or destitute. This was someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Still, as whispers slithered from table to table and guests wrinkled their noses with exaggerated disdain, Dennis hesitated. From her office, Cassidy Rowe emerged, high heels clicking on marble. One glance told her all she needed, a walking PR nightmare dripping rainwater onto her hand-selected Persian rug. She flicked her eyes to Dean Whitaker. Handle it, she ordered, her voice like frost on glass. Dean didn't disappoint. He approached the man like a police officer preparing to make an arrest, his voice loud and condescending. Sir, he drawled, this isn't a soup kitchen. You're lost. But the man stood firm. No, he said, glancing calmly at the tables of amused onlookers. I'm exactly where I need to be, and I'd still like that table. Laughter rippled across the room. Dean smirked, then scanned the man up and down. Our cheapest entree is $60. Got a winning scratch ticket in that coat of yours? I can pay, the man said simply, reaching into his tattered jacket. Dean's smirk widened. Then how about you shuffle back to your cardboard castle before I call security? At the bar, Alina Brooks watched the scene unfold, her stomach tightening. No one else seemed to see what she saw. The quiet dignity in the man's posture, the intelligence in his eyes. He wasn't humiliated. He was watching, taking notes. Sir, she said gently, stepping forward despite Dean's venomous glare. Would you like me to call you a cab? It's cold out there. He turned to her with a soft smile. Thank you, young lady, but I came here to dine. Then, turning back to Dean, he added, and yes, I can afford whatever's on your menu. Dean scoffed. And I suppose you took your helicopter here? Cassidy finally moved closer, clearly amused. Victor, please escort the gentleman out. Maybe give him yesterday's rolls, if we have any left. Still, the man didn't budge. Instead, he looked at Cassidy and said quietly, Miss Rowe, is it? Owner of this fine establishment? She froze. You know who I am? I make it a point to know the places I visit, he said. And I'd suggest you reconsider how you treat your guests. Things aren't always what they seem. Cassidy Rowe's smirk faltered just for a second. Something in the old man's voice, measured, calm, but edged with something deeper, cut through her bravado, but before she could respond, Dennis Shaw approached in a fluster. Ms. Rowe, he whispered urgently, the Whitman party just arrived. The senator's wife is with them. Cassidy's priorities snapped back into place. VIPs, influencers, money. With a dismissive wave toward Dean, she said curtly, Handle it, then glided away, her fake smile plastered back on like a mask. Dean turned to the old man with renewed venom. Time to go, Grandpa. The man didn't argue. He simply looked past Dean, locking eyes with Alina. Kindness, he said gently, is a rare virtue in places built on image. Don't lose it. Then, without another word, he allowed himself to be escorted, no, shoved, out into the pouring rain. The laughter resumed, the tension dissolved. The elite diners returned to their amuse-bouches and $800 bottles of wine. But Alina stood frozen, watching the door swing shut behind the old man. Something about him haunted her. Who was he? And why did she have this deep, unsettling feeling that they hadn't seen the last of him? The next morning, Cassidy Rowe stared at her computer screen in frustration. Outside her office windows, the sun poured over the polished windows of Meridian. Inside, her espresso was cold and the spreadsheets colder. Despite the full reservation book and sky-high prices, her margins were collapsing. Ingredient costs were soaring. The HVAC repairs had drained 10 grand and the rent, up 15% last quarter, was bleeding them dry. She took another sip of bitterness and clicked refresh on her inbox. Still no reply from Kingsford Capital. Her last hope. She'd courted the firm for months, pitching them expansion plans, new locations, brand deals, but without that investment, Meridian would be bankrupt within 6 months, and Cassidy Rowe would be finished. The phone on her desk buzzed. Yes, she snapped. Bellevue Hospital is calling about Chef Tate's payment plan, her assistant said. Cassidy rolled her eyes. Tell Marcus personal calls aren't to be handled during business hours. She hung up before the reply came, then glared again at the spreadsheet, searching for something, anything she could cut. Staffing was already razor thin. Maybe she could swap to cheaper fish vendors. No one would notice. Would they? A knock at the door. Dean Whitaker strode in without waiting. Lunch service is covered, he reported, tossing a clipboard on her desk. But Williams called in sick again, probably interviewing at Carson's downtown. Fire him, Cassidy said flatly. I don't do disloyalty. Already done, Dean replied with a smirk. Also, I reassigned Alina's section to myself tonight. The Andersons tipped $400 last visit. Cassidy didn't even blink. Fine, just keep her quiet this time. I don't need more whining about tip theft. She won't say a word, Dean said confidently. She knows better. And with that, he turned and left, completely unaware that a storm far greater than last night's was already building. Outside Meridian's glass doors, on a quiet bench across the street, the old man sat once more. Dry now, observing, taking notes, and planning. That evening, Meridian gleamed under the city lights like a golden promise. Inside, the staff hustled through final preparations, silver polished, linens crisp, wine glasses aligned by the millimeter. No one noticed the old man watching from across the street. Not yet, but Alina Brooks noticed him when she stepped outside for a moment of air. There he was again. Same coat, same eyes. Only this time she saw something else. Intention. He wasn't just lingering. He was studying. And he was taking notes. A young homeless woman approached him, clearly asking for help. Alina watched, expecting him to offer spare change, but instead the old man stood, spoke gently to the woman, then walked her slow and steady toward a nearby coffee shop. They sat, talked. He listened with patience no one ever afforded people like her. Alina couldn't stop watching. Inside, Dean Whitaker chuckled at the sight of him. "Look who's back," he sneered to another server. "The bum from last night, probably casing the place." The server raised an eyebrow. "What's he gonna steal? Linen napkins?" Dean shrugged. "Maybe a wine cork or a few crumbs from the trash. Whatever. If he steps inside again, he's gone before the appetizers hit the table." But he did come back. Just after 7 p.m., the door opened and there he stood. This time cleaner, slightly more polished. Same simple clothes but pressed, his beard trimmed, his cane sanded smooth. Still humble but undeniable dignity. Dennis Shaw, the maitre d', recognized him instantly, and this time didn't try to intercept. Something about the way the old man stood said, "You don't get to push me aside today." Dean stormed forward, already fuming. "You again? Didn't you get the message? This ain't your place." The old man met his gaze, calm and composed. "Your sign says open to all. I believe you're legally required to serve any paying customer, not causing disruption." "I'm neither disruptive nor broke." Dean scowled. "Listen, old man, my name is Elijah Morgan," the man interrupted softly. "But most people just call me Mr. Morgan." "I don't care if they call you the King of England," Dean snapped. "You're not welcome here." Cassidy appeared just then, mask firmly in place. "Is there a problem?" Dean gestured toward Elijah. "Just leaving." But Elijah turned to her. "Ms. Rowe, I assure you I won't disturb your guests. I simply came to enjoy a meal, one that I can fully afford." Cassidy hesitated. The restaurant was packed. Patrons were watching. Making a scene would do more damage than seating a quiet old man. "Very well, Mr. Morgan," she said icily. "Dean will show you to a table." Dean's jaw clenched, but he obeyed, leading Elijah straight to the worst table in the house. The one by the kitchen, under the swinging doors, next to the server trays. "Enjoy the ambiance," Dean said mockingly, slapping down a menu. But Elijah smiled as he took his seat. "Thank you," he said softly. "I'm sure I will." From across the room, Alina watched, heart pounding. Something was coming. She could feel it. And this time, Meridian, be ready. Alina Brooks approached the table with a glass of water, her steps steady, but her heart racing. "Would you like something to drink while you look at the menu, Mr. Morgan?" she asked, carefully respectful. Elijah looked up and smiled warmly. "Yes, thank you, Alina." She blinked. "How did you— You're wearing a name tag," he said with a soft chuckle. "And you were the only one who spoke to me like a person last night. I remember that sort of thing." The way he said it, not just grateful, but precise, intentional. It unsettled her in the best way. Unlike most customers who barely acknowledge servers unless they had complaints, Elijah looked Alina in the eye, as though she wasn't invisible, as though she mattered. In the kitchen, murmurs had already started. The old bum was back, this time seated, this time cleaner. But most shockingly, he'd ordered the chef's tasting menu, the most expensive item in the house. With the full wine pairing, Dean stormed over, red-faced. "That'll be $400 up front, house policy, for certain customers." Everyone knew it was a lie, but Elijah didn't flinch. He reached into his old coat and calmly pulled out 4 crisp $100 bills, placing them on the table without a word. Dean snatched the money like it burned him and stormed away. By now, whispers were spreading through the staff. "He's loaded? Maybe a food critic? No way, he drinks wine like he knows what he's doing." It didn't take long for the first hint of something strange to ripple outward. When the sommelier brought the wine for the amuse-bouche, Elijah gently sniffed, then swirled and tasted, then frowned slightly. "This is a lovely Sauvignon Blanc," he said with polite clarity. "But it's not the Domaine Vacheron listed on your pairing menu. It's a Pascal Jolivet, excellent in its own right, but with a softer mineral profile. Perhaps you've run out?" The sommelier turned pale. He glanced nervously toward Dean. I'll double-check," he mumbled, scurrying away. Across the room, a well-known literary critic was dining with a local publisher. The critic recited a line from Keats loud enough to be heard, "Beauty is truth, truth, beauty." Elijah, without turning, completed the thought. "That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know." The critic blinked, turned. "You know Keats?" "One of my favorites," Elijah replied with ease. "Though I find Ode on Melancholy more resonant with age. In the very temple of delight, veiled melancholy has her sovereign shrine." The critic sat back, visibly impressed. "Not many quote that one." Elijah smiled gently. "Few have lived enough contrast to understand it." From behind the bar, Cassidy Rowe watched, eyes narrowing. Something about him, this old man they'd mocked, was starting to unravel the entire illusion of Meridian's power. And he hadn't even finished his soup. In the kitchen, Chef Marcus Tate stood over the sauce station, focused yet wary. He'd heard the talk about the old man's wine correction, the Keats quote, and now the compliment about the fish course that had the sous chef blushing like a rookie. Marcus wasn't easily impressed, but when Alina stepped in with a message, he said the balance of acid in the fish was impeccable. He paused mid-stir. Impeccable? Nobody used that word unless they knew what they were talking about. With a glance at the clock and a deep breath, Marcus wiped his hands, adjusted his chef's coat, and did something he rarely did. He walked out to the dining room. Elijah was savoring a scallop when Marcus approached. "Mr. Morgan, I'm Chef Marcus Tate," he said. "I wanted to thank you for the kind words." Elijah looked up, nodding with genuine warmth. "The pleasure is mine, Chef. Your technique with the beurre blanc, especially the note of fermented black garlic, was masterful. Complex but restrained, you let the scallop sing." Marcus blinked. "That wasn't a compliment. That was an analysis." "You seem to know quite a bit about cooking," he said slowly. "I've had the good fortune to dine in some remarkable places," Elijah replied modestly. "But it's rare to find someone who understands both precision and restraint. You don't just cook, you care." The words hit Marcus harder than expected. He cleared his throat, suddenly unsure of what to say. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Elijah smiled again, then said softly, "By the way, I hope your daughter's doing better." Marcus froze. He hadn't told anyone at the restaurant about Ava's heart condition. Hadn't mentioned the unpaid bills, the insurance rejections, the endless nights wondering how to come up with $20,000 before her next episode. He stared at Elijah. "How did you—" "I apologize if I overstepped," Elijah said gently. "I just wanted to say, children are remarkably resilient. With the right support, miracles can happen." For a moment, the world felt quieter, slower. Something about Elijah's voice, his eyes felt familiar, not in appearance, but in presence. Like someone who'd carried burdens heavier than money could solve. "Thank you," Marcus said, voice thick. "Truly." Elijah nodded, then turned his attention back to his plate. Marcus returned to the kitchen, but something had shifted. The man they had dismissed, mocked, nearly thrown out, had just noticed his culinary nuance, seen his personal pain, and spoken like someone who understood. And none of them had the faintest idea who he really was, but they were starting to wonder. Especially Dean, who watched the whole thing unfold from the bar, jaw clenched, palms sweating. Because suddenly this old man wasn't just someone, he was something, and Dean Whitaker had treated him like trash. As the evening drew to a close, Elijah Morgan neatly folded his napkin and placed it beside the empty plate. The final dish had been exquisite. Duck breast with cherry reduction, served with an elegance that matched the chef's talent. But it wasn't the food that lingered in the air now. It was the silence, a silence born not of absence but of tension. Staff stole glances from behind the bar. Guests, though trying to remain discreet, shifted in their seats, stealing side-eyes toward the mysterious old man by the kitchen doors. Elijah raised a hand gently. Alina Brooks was there in seconds. "May I bring your check, Mr. Morgan?" "Please," he said, smiling. "And no rush, you've been wonderful." Alina beamed, then hurried to retrieve the bill. As she placed it in front of him, Dean Whitaker materialized. Uninvited, his smirk drawn tight like a wire. "I'll handle this," Dean said sharply, snatching the check from Alina's hands. He turned to Elijah with a tone soaked in venom-laced politeness. "House policy for certain customers." Alina's face darkened, but Elijah said nothing. He simply reached into his coat and pulled out a slim wallet. From it, he placed 4 crisp $100 bills on the tray. This should more than cover it. Dean's grin faltered. His fingers twitched as he scooped up the cash and disappeared toward the back, muttering under his breath. When he returned, Elijah signed the receipt with a steady hand. Then calmly, he slipped the merchant copy into his pocket and handed the customer copy directly to Alina, a $500 tip on a $450 bill. "For your excellent service," Elijah said, his eyes locking onto hers. "Not just tonight, but for standing tall in a place where kindness is scarce. Don't lose that." Alina's lips parted in surprise and something behind her eyes shimmered. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't." As Elijah stood to leave, Dean intercepted him near the door. "Enjoyed your little performance?" Dean sneered low enough for only them to hear. "What's next? You going to waltz into the mayor's mansion and critique the drapes?" Elijah tilted his head, studying Dean with quiet amusement. Then in a voice calm as glass, he said, "Young man, the way someone treats those they believe can do nothing for them reveals everything about their character." Dean flinched like he'd been slapped. Elijah gave him a polite nod and walked out into the night, his cane tapping gently on the marble floor. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with confusion and curiosity. Guests whispered. Staff exchanged wide-eyed stares. Something had just happened. They didn't know who Elijah Morgan truly was, but one thing was certain. They had not seen the last of him, and tomorrow everything was going to change, dramatically. The next morning, sunlight crept through the frosted windows of Cassidy Rowe's office, throwing pale streaks across the expensive mahogany desk where her laptop screen glowed ominously. Her brows furrowed as she scrolled through the numbers. Despite the waitlist stretching weeks ahead and a dining room packed every night, Meridian was bleeding. Food costs had spiked. The old kitchen equipment was breaking down faster than her repair team could respond. Rent had quietly jumped by 15%. And worst of all, there was still no word from the investors at the Harrington Group. Cassidy gritted her teeth and reached for her third espresso. Her red, manicured nails trembled slightly as she checked her inbox again. Still nothing. If she didn't secure a capital infusion within 6 months, the whole empire she had built, brick by meticulous brick, would collapse under its own pretentious weight. A humiliating demise. Her intercom buzzed. "Yes?" she snapped. "Bellevue Hospital's billing office." Her assistant replied. "They're asking about Chef Tate's payment plan." Cassidy rolled her eyes. "Take a message. And remind Marcus that personal matters stay off the clock." She ended the call and returned to the screen, staring down at the columns of red. Somewhere, there had to be fat she could trim. More staff cuts? Cheaper produce? Switch out the olive oil for something generic? The clientele wouldn't notice as long as it was plated with flair. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Dean Whitaker strode in without waiting. "Williams called in sick again," he said with a smug half-smile. "Rumor is he's interviewing at Carson's." Cassidy didn't even look up. "Fire him." "Already done." Dean took a step closer, his voice lowering. "Also, I shifted the floor plan. I'll be taking Alina's section tonight. The Andersons tipped $400 last time. No point letting it go to waste." Cassidy nodded absently, eyes still on the screen. Dean continued, his tone oily. "And don't worry, she won't complain. I made that clear last time." "Good," Cassidy muttered. She didn't need any more drama from servers whining about tips. Her mind was already consumed by the looming visit from Harrington Group. She had pulled every string to get them through the door. And now the future of Meridian rested on a single, flawless evening. Dean moved to leave, then paused. "What about that old man, the one from last night?" Cassidy blinked. "What about him?" "He made another reservation." Her eyes narrowed. "Seriously?" Dean nodded. Same time, same name, same attitude. Cassidy exhaled slowly, thinking. "Fine. Seat him far from the private room, somewhere out of the way, and make sure he doesn't become a distraction." Dean smirked. "Already planned." As he left the room, Cassidy returned her focus to the spreadsheets. But a flicker of unease lingered. The old man had unsettled something. Not just her staff, not just the guests. Her, and she couldn't quite explain why. But tomorrow night all masks would drop, and some truths would hit harder than any balance sheet ever could. In the stillness of the prep kitchen, Marcus Tate stood hunched over his phone, his tall frame stooped by the weight of more than just fatigue. His voice was low, urgent. "Yes, I understand, ma'am. The hospital needs half the payment before they'll schedule." He closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose as the answer came, gentle but unyielding. I can get another 3,000 by the end of the week, please. My daughter's getting worse." The call ended with a clinical promise. Without at least $10,000, Emma's surgery could not be scheduled. Marcus stood frozen, his chef's coat soaked with heat and frustration. 8-year-old Emma, his baby girl, was running out of time. Born with a rare heart defect, she'd been holding on thanks to medication and prayer. But now, surgery wasn't a choice, it was survival. And on a chef's salary, that $20,000 gap might as well have been Mount Everest. A sous chef poked his head around the corner. "Chef, the fish deliveries here doesn't look good." Marcus blinked himself back into the present, nodding silently. He walked to the receiving door and peeled back the wrapping on a crate of sea bass. His nose wrinkled. It wasn't spoiled, but it wasn't fresh. He looked at the invoice. $800. His fingers hovered over his phone. Then slowly he turned to the delivery man. "We'll take it, but only at 60% of the listed price. It's substandard, that's all I'm offering." The man grumbled but nodded. Marcus signed. As he walked away, Marcus felt sick. He had never compromised like that, never accepted less than his culinary standards. But today those standards didn't matter more than Emma. He would do anything to save her, even if it meant losing a part of himself. Across the restaurant, in the cramped locker room, Alina Brooks counted out tips from the lunch shift with trembling fingers. $42. It wasn't much, but it was something. She pulled an envelope from the lining of her purse and tucked the bills inside, adding to the growing, pitiful pile labeled in black Sharpie, "Culinary Dream." Tucked beneath that envelope was the letter that had changed her life 2 weeks ago. "We are pleased to inform you of your acceptance. The Culinary Institute of America." Her dream, her shot. But the scholarship only covered half. She needed another $5,000 in 6 weeks or they'd give her spot to someone else. And Dean Whitaker kept stealing her best sections. Just like tonight, he'd taken the Andersons again, the highest tipping party on the books. Alina's jaw clenched. She couldn't cry again. Not now. Not when she had tables to serve and dreams to chase. Outside, the afternoon haze rolled into golden dusk. Across the street from Meridian, on a weathered bench, sat a man in clean but humble clothes. Elijah Morgan. He held a small notebook in one hand, an old flip phone in the other. He made a note, then looked up at the restaurant and waited. From the bench across the street, Elijah Morgan watched the heart of Meridian throb with its nightly performance of wealth and illusion. Servers glided behind glass like well-rehearsed dancers, their smiles sharp, their eyes tired. A valet adjusted his bow tie. A hostess tossed her hair and checked her reflection in the window. Elijah made a note in his weathered notebook, his gaze calm and unwavering. A shivering young woman approached him hesitantly. Her coat was threadbare, her eyes hollow. "Excuse me, sir. I don't mean to bother, but do you maybe have $1 or $2 to spare for some food?" Elijah didn't hesitate. Instead of reaching for his wallet, he folded his notebook, stood and said gently, "Come on, let's find you something warm." They walked together to a nearby cafe, a modest place 2 blocks from Meridian's towering facade. He bought her a sandwich and a hot drink, then stayed to talk. He didn't just give, he listened. He asked her name, her story. She told him about the job she'd lost, the parents who'd died, the way the world had stopped seeing her once she started sleeping on sidewalks. And he listened, truly listened, like every word mattered. After nearly an hour, he returned to his bench, alone, but not empty. Back inside Meridian, Dean Whitaker was polishing wine glasses when he caught a glimpse of Elijah crossing the street again. "You have got to be kidding me," he muttered, nudging a server. "Look who's back." The other server leaned to look, then scoffed. The old bum from last night? Maybe he's casing the place. Dean laughed bitterly. Yeah, right. What's he gonna steal? One of the coasters? He could barely walk straight. As evening fell, the restaurant filled once again with designer perfume and whispered ambition. Then the door opened. Elijah stepped in. He wore the same coat, but it was brushed clean. His hair, now neatly combed, shimmered silver under the chandelier light. He had shaved. His gait was slow but steady, his presence quiet but strangely commanding. The maitre d', Dennis Shaw, froze for a beat. This time, he hesitated before intercepting. Dean spotted the old man and rushed over, his voice drenched in disdain. You again didn't get the hint yesterday? Elijah met his eyes without flinching. I believe the law requires you to serve anyone who can pay. I am not disruptive, and I most certainly can pay. Dean leaned in, eyes narrowed. I don't care if your name is King Charles, you're not welcome here. At that moment, Cassidy Rowe appeared like a shadow in heels, her practiced smile already cracking. Is there a problem? She asked, tone sugar-laced with steel. Dean didn't miss a beat. This gentleman was just leaving, but Elijah didn't move. He turned to Cassidy and said with quiet confidence, Ms. Rowe, I assure you I intend to cause no trouble. I've dined here before. Tonight is no different. I simply wish to be treated as a customer. Cassidy studied him. A ripple of attention spread through nearby table. She couldn't risk a scene. Her eyes flicked to Dean. Seat him somewhere discreet. Dean's jaw clenched, but he obeyed. He led Elijah to the worst table in the house, next to the kitchen doors where servers burst through like bullets. Enjoy the ambiance, he sneered, slapping down a menu. Elijah took his seat with quiet dignity. I'm sure I will. Alina Brooks approached the table cautiously, tray balanced on one hand, her soft voice rising above the clatter of silverware and swinging kitchen doors. Would you like some water while you look over the menu, Mr. Morgan? Elijah looked up and smiled, warm, genuine, and impossibly calm amidst the chaos. Yes, thank you, Alina. She blinked. How did you— You're wearing a name tag, he said with a light chuckle. And you were the only one yesterday who treated me like a human being. I remember that sort of thing. Alina's breath caught. In a restaurant like Meridian, kindness was a liability. But this man, he saw it as a virtue. There was something disarming about the way he looked at her. Not just at her uniform or her smile, but through her, like he understood what it took to keep showing up with grace when you were invisible to everyone else. From the kitchen, Chef Marcus Tate leaned toward the service window. Is that the same guy from last night? One of the line cooks asked. Sure is, another replied, snorting. Back for round 2, probably here for leftovers. Marcus squinted through the tiny window, studying Elijah. He didn't say anything, but something about the man's composure made his chest tighten. Meanwhile, Dean hovered nearby like a vulture. When he saw Elijah hand Alina the menu and ask for the tasting menu, the most expensive item in the restaurant, his eyes lit up with cruelty. That'll be $400 up front, he said, striding over. House policy for certain guests. It was a lie, everyone knew it, but Elijah didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his worn coat and produced 4 crisp $100 bills. Will this be sufficient? Dean's smirk faltered. Yeah, sure, fine. He snatched the money like it might disappear. As Alina returned with a glass of water, Elijah smiled again. Thank you, Alina. I look forward to tonight's meal. She nodded, still watching him like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. As the evening wore on, the buzz about the mysterious old man spread. A famous author at a nearby table quoted a line of poetry, prompting Elijah to quietly finish the verse and offer an insight that left the author stunned. When the sommelier tried to substitute a cheaper wine with the pairing, Elijah gently corrected him, naming the exact vintage and noting its distinct mineral profile. Back in the kitchen, Marcus raised an eyebrow when the message came in. Customer at table 18 complimented the acidity balance in the scallops. He peeked again through the service window. That wasn't just some cranky old customer. That man knew food. Keeps this up, Marcus muttered, and I'll end up delivering the next course myself. Out on the floor, Alina watched Elijah with renewed curiosity. He wasn't just dining, he was observing. Every corner, every face, every act of arrogance or kindness, large or small. And something in her gut told her he wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Chef Marcus Tate wiped his hands on a clean towel, heart beating faster than usual. It wasn't every day a diner noticed the acidity balance in a beurre blanc, especially not one dressed like he'd just wandered in from a bus shelter. But something about Elijah Morgan wouldn't let Marcus rest. He adjusted his chef's coat and stepped out of the kitchen. An uncommon move. Marcus wasn't one to schmooze with customers unless it was an anniversary or a food critic. Yet tonight felt different. Elijah looked up as the chef approached. "Mr. Morgan," Marcus said, offering a respectful nod. "I wanted to personally thank you for the kind words about the scallops. It's not often someone recognizes the subtleties." "The pleasure is mine, Chef Tate," Elijah replied warmly. "Your technique speaks for itself. The beurre blanc, subtle touch of fermented black garlic, yes, was inspired." Marcus blinked. "You nailed that?" he said, surprised. "Most folks think it's lemon zest." Elijah's eyes sparkled. "I've had the good fortune of dining in many places, but it's rare to find passion and restraint in the same dish. That takes discipline." Marcus found himself smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile he hadn't worn in weeks. "I try," he said simply. Then Elijah leaned forward, his tone softening. "By the way, I couldn't help overhearing earlier. Your daughter, Emma, is it?" The chef froze. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained low. "Yes, she's 8, needs heart surgery." Elijah's gaze didn't waver. "She sounds like a fighter. Kids are resilient, more than we give them credit for." Marcus swallowed hard. "Insurance won't cover the full cost. We're doing what we can, I believe," Elijah said gently. "Miracles tend to find their way into the hands of those who refuse to give up." The words hit Marcus deeper than he expected. No pity, no grand gesture, just quiet understanding, like the man had walked that road himself. Marcus nodded, unsure what else to say. He turned to leave, but paused. "Thanks," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Elijah simply smiled. "The pleasure was mine, Chef." Back in the kitchen, Marcus leaned against the prep table, taking a deep breath. There was something about that man. He wasn't here just for the food. He was watching, noticing, measuring character. And for the first time in a long while, Marcus wasn't afraid of what he might find. Out in the dining room, Elijah picked up his glass, swirling the wine thoughtfully. He glanced around the room, the marble floors, the shimmering chandeliers, the symphony of vanity and performance. But his gaze always returned to the people. Not the powerful, not the polished, but the kind ones. The weary ones still fighting the good fight behind tired eyes. Elijah smiled. The reckoning had already begun. They just didn't know it yet. As the final course was cleared, Elijah Morgan leaned back in his chair, his expression serene. The tasting menu had not disappointed, and neither had the people who had shown their true colors, both light and dark. Melissa Brooks approached his table with a tentative smile. "Would you like dessert, Mr. Morgan? Or perhaps just the check?" Elijah looked up at her, his eyes warm. "The check will do, thank you, Melissa." She handed him the leather-bound folder, still half expecting him to flinch at the total. Instead, he opened it with deliberate calm, examined the receipt, and pulled out his wallet. At the bar, Dean Whitaker watched like a hawk. His arms were folded, lips curled into that signature sneer of his. "What's the old man doing?" he whispered to another server. "Plotting how to pay in coupons?" But what happened next shut him up cold. Elijah pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills and laid them neatly inside the folder, covering the $450 tab and then some. But he didn't stop there. He reached for a second slip of paper and began writing a note. After a moment, he folded it and slipped it under the bill, then closed the folder gently. "Good." Melissa returned to collect the check. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I'll wait." Her eyes widened. There it was, a $500 tip. She looked up, stunned. "Sir, I don't know what to say." Elijah smiled gently. "You've already said it, in how you treated me. That's all I needed." From behind her, Dean stormed over. "That tip should be reported to management," he snapped. "House policy." Without missing a beat, Elijah turned to him, his tone calm but laced with steel. "Young man," he said, "the way a man treats those he believes can do nothing for him says everything about his character. Dean opened his mouth to retort, but nothing came. Not a word. Melissa blinked. That line. It echoed something she'd read once, something powerful. Elijah rose from the table with quiet dignity, nodding respectfully to her. You've got a gift, Melissa. Don't let this place crush it. Then, without another glance at Dean, he turned and made his way to the door, pausing only to thank the maitre d' and nod to the coat attendant who, embarrassed, finally offered a courteous smile. As the door closed behind him, silence fell across the restaurant. Melissa clutched the tip in her hand, like it was made of gold, not for the money but for what it meant. She had been seen, respected. Dean stood frozen, face pale with disbelief. He had been measured and found lacking. The story of the old man with ragged clothes would echo through the restaurant for days to come. But none of them, not even Dean, could shake the feeling that they had just encountered someone far greater than they'd assumed. Someone who was watching and taking notes. That night, back in her small apartment above a laundromat on the west side of town, Melissa Brooks sat cross-legged on her worn-out couch, still holding the slip of paper Elijah had left beneath the tip. She read the quote again and again. The way a man treats those he believes can do nothing for him says everything about his character. Something about it struck deep, more than just a poetic line. It felt familiar, weighted. On impulse, she opened her laptop and typed the quote into a search engine. Within seconds, articles began to populate the screen. Her heart stuttered. That quote, exactly as Elijah had said it, was attributed repeatedly to Elijah Morgan, billionaire philanthropist and founder of the Morgan Foundation. A man known for his fierce belief in dignity, ethics, and silent giving. Melissa stared at the screen. Side-by-side images popped up. Grainy photos of a younger Elijah at press conferences and charity events, always in the background, always looking unassuming. But the eyes, the jawline, the calm composure. Her hand flew to her mouth. It was him. The homeless old man they'd all mocked was Elijah Morgan, the richest man in the city and arguably the country. "Oh my God," she whispered. She kept reading. The Morgan Foundation was notorious for its secretive methods of vetting potential recipients. Several articles referenced how the foundation would send anonymous representatives in disguise to test businesses, not their spreadsheets but their character. One bakery in Detroit was gifted $2 million in investment after an old janitor kept showing up and watching how they treated their homeless customers. Another restaurant in Chicago had its medical debts for employees wiped clean after an elderly man ate there for a week, tipping generously and observing. Melissa felt a chill run through her spine. He was testing them. Her fingers trembled as she pulled up an old interview transcript. "I never invest in a business until I've seen how they treat the powerless. Not when a camera is on, but when they think no one is watching." Elijah Morgan, 2013. The pieces fell into place. The clothes, the calm demeanor, the precise knowledge about food, his conversations, his observations, her whoopiness, Dean's cruelty, Cassidy's obsession with image. It had all been noted. Melissa leaned back in stunned silence. He hadn't come to Meridian to eat. He had come to see. And tomorrow night, if the rumors were true, the restaurant would be hosting investors from the Harrington Group. A high-stakes deal that could determine Meridian's future. But what if Elijah Morgan had already made his decision? Melissa's thoughts raced. She had to tell someone. She had to warn Chef Marcus Tate. He deserved to know. Maybe there was still time for at least someone in this place to be spared the fallout. She grabbed her phone, heart pounding, and typed a message. "Chef Tate, I need to talk to you. It's about the old man from tonight. Please trust me. I think he's someone very important, someone who could change everything." She hit send, and for the first time in a long time, Melissa didn't feel powerless. She felt ready, because if justice was coming to Meridian, she wanted to be standing on the right side of it. In the quiet of his cramped office behind the kitchen, Chef Marcus Tate rubbed his temples, the weight of exhaustion heavy on his shoulders. He had just finished inventory and was mentally preparing for the next day's grueling service when his phone buzzed. A message from Melissa Brooks. "Chef Tate, I need to talk to you. It's about the old man from tonight. Please trust me." I think he's someone very important, someone who could change everything. His eyebrows drew together in confusion. Melissa wasn't the type to overreact. If she said it was important, it was. He called her immediately. "Melissa," he said, voice low. "What's this about?" "Chef," she whispered urgently. "You remember the man who ordered the tasting menu tonight, the one Dean shoved around last night?" "How could I forget?" Marcus sighed. "I nearly jumped over the line to slap that smug look off Dean's face. Chef, I think that man is Elijah Morgan." "Silence," Marcus blinked. "Wait, the Elijah Morgan?" "The billionaire," Melissa confirmed. "The Morgan Foundation. I've been doing research all night. His quotes, his eyes, his mannerisms, it all matches. He's known for disguising himself to test businesses before investing. There are stories, confirmed ones, of him doing this exact thing in other cities." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, letting the words sink in. If it was true, it explained everything. The calm intelligence in the man's eyes, the way he spoke about food, the way he observed everything, his kindness to the staff who showed decency, the outrageous tips, the sudden interest in how the restaurant treated its people. "And now we've treated him like garbage," Marcus muttered bitterly. "Dean insulted him. Cassidy ordered him out, and I accepted spoiled fish tonight just to make up for costs." "No," Melissa said quickly. "You tried to negotiate it down to afford Emma's surgery. That's different." Marcus let out a slow breath. "Still, if he's who you say he is." "He is," Melissa said firmly. "And if he's planning something big, tomorrow night is our last chance to stand on the right side of it." Marcus stood from his chair, the fatigue in his bones suddenly replaced by something else. Urgency. He walked over to a drawer, opened it, and pulled out the envelope Elijah had asked to be delivered earlier. Inside was $500, labeled in neat handwriting. "For Chef Tate. Appreciation, not charity." His throat tightened. He hadn't told anyone about it, not even the staff, because he'd wanted to believe the gesture was real, not pity. Now he knew. "It's him," Marcus whispered. "God help us, it's really him." There was a knock on his office door. He quickly slipped the envelope back into the drawer. Dean Whitaker's smug voice called out, "Hope you're not falling asleep, Chef. Big night tomorrow, don't screw it up." Marcus didn't respond. He stared at the door, his jaw clenched. Everything was about to change, and Dean Whitaker had no idea he was standing at the edge of a cliff. The next morning, Cassidy Rose stood at the center of Meridian's dining room, dressed immaculately in a sharp navy suit. Her high heels echoed against the marble floor as she addressed the entire staff gathered before her like an army awaiting orders. "This is it," she announced, her voice cold and commanding. "Tonight determines the future of Meridian. The Harrison Group is coming. A multi-million-dollar investment is on the table. I want perfection, no excuses, no mistakes. Anyone who falls short will be replaced immediately." There was no applause, just silence. Even the most seasoned servers looked uneasy. Beside her, Dean Whitaker wore his usual smirk, hands clasped behind his back like a smug captain overseeing a ship he believed he controlled. "I'll be handling the Harrison table personally," Dean chimed in. "Let's make sure their experience is unforgettable, and keep the riffraff far away from the private dining room." Cassidy's eyes flicked to Melissa for a brief second, then away like she didn't exist. But Melissa didn't flinch. She stood tall. After last night, everything looked different. When the meeting dispersed, Melissa slipped into the kitchen. Chef Marcus Tate was already prepping for the night, his sleeves rolled up and intensity in his eyes. He didn't even look up when she entered. "Did you talk to him again?" Melissa asked. Marcus shook his head. "But I don't need to. I'm sure now. It's Elijah Morgan." Melissa exhaled. "I sent a message to the Morgan Foundation's website last night. I didn't expect a reply, but I got one this morning." She handed Marcus her phone. He read the message slowly. "Ms. Brooks, your message has been received. Mr. Morgan encourages you to observe carefully tonight. Sometimes the clearest truths emerge under pressure. The Morgan Foundation." Marcus handed the phone back, his expression unreadable. "He's watching us, testing us. And Cassidy, Dean, they're failing miserably. He gave us all a chance," Melissa said softly, "and they spat in his face. A flicker of determination flashed in Marcus's eyes. Then it's time someone showed him this place still has heart. Suddenly, Dean burst into the kitchen. "Hey, lovebirds," he sneered. "Unless you're planning to confess your feelings over creme brulee, maybe get back to work. We open in 4 hours." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Melissa didn't flinch either. "Of course, Mr. Whitaker," she said sweetly, brushing past him. Dean scowled, muttering something under his breath about entitled nobodies. He had no idea his days of strutting around with false power were numbered, because tonight the man he had mocked and dismissed would return, not as old Joe, but as Elijah Morgan, the man with the power to turn their world upside down. And he wasn't coming to dine. He was coming for truth, for justice, and for reckoning. The golden hour descended upon Meridian like a carefully crafted illusion. Crystal chandeliers glistened brighter than ever. Waiters glided across the polished floor in perfect rhythm. Exotic floral arrangements perfumed the air with a manufactured elegance. Everything was designed to impress the Harrison Group, the investors who could erase Cassidy Rowe's financial nightmares with a single signature. But amidst the orchestrated grandeur, a quiet storm was brewing. At exactly 7 p.m., the door swung open, and Elijah Morgan stepped inside. He was dressed in clean, simple clothes, still modest, but now with undeniable dignity. A buttoned coat, polished shoes, a fresh shave. His presence didn't scream wealth or status, but it radiated something far more commanding: authority. The maitre d', Dennis Shaw, recognized him instantly. This time his greeting came with a respectful nod. "Good evening, Mr. Morgan, your usual table?" "That would be perfect, Dennis," Elijah replied, his voice calm as always, but every syllable carried weight. From across the dining room, Dean Whitaker caught sight of him and froze. "What the? Not again?" he muttered under his breath, storming toward the front like a man who'd just seen a ghost. "You again?" Dean said, forcing a tight smile. "Listen, old-timer, this is not the night. We've got VIPs arriving and your table's already been—" "I'll take the same table as before," Elijah said, gently interrupting. "Unless, of course, you believe some customers matter more than others." Dean's face twisted. "For tonight, yeah, they do." At that moment, Cassidy Rowe appeared, her heels clicking with purpose. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, scanning the situation with professional detachment. "This gentleman was just leaving," Dean said, trying to regain control. Elijah turned to face her fully. "Ms. Rowe, I assure you, I have no intention of causing a scene. I simply wish to enjoy my meal, the same way any paying customer would." Cassidy hesitated. For a flicker of a second, something in Elijah's eyes unsettled her, but she couldn't afford a scandal. Not tonight. "Very well, Mr. Morgan," she said coolly. "Dean will show you to a table." Dean's mouth fell open. "But—" "No buts," she snapped. "Do it, now." With barely concealed disgust, Dean led Elijah to the worst table in the house again. The one by the kitchen doors with the constant clatter and foot traffic. He slapped a menu down. "Enjoy the ambiance," he muttered, but Elijah simply nodded and sat, serene as ever. Moments later, Alina Brooks appeared at his side with a quiet smile. "Water while you look over the menu, Mr. Morgan?" "Yes, thank you, Alina," Elijah replied, his tone warm. She blinked. "You remember my name?" "You remembered me," he said with a wink. "That counts for something." From her station near the bar, Cassidy kept glancing over. Something about this man wasn't adding up, and soon everything would unravel. The private dining room fell into a silence so thick, even the ticking of the antique clock on the wall seemed to stop. Cassidy Rowe's carefully rehearsed elegance had cracked. Her lipstick slightly smudged, her hand trembling as she clutched a crystal glass of Chardonnay. Dean Whitaker, who moments ago had strutted like a peacock beside her, now stood frozen, the smug confidence drained from his face. Across the room, Elijah Morgan stood taller than ever. Not because he raised his voice, but because the truth itself had taken form in him. No longer the weathered old man in rags, no longer the man they could dismiss. He was now the man with power, purpose, and proof. "I came here to dine," Elijah began, his voice low but cutting. not to perform. Yet you turned this place into a stage of humiliation. Congratulations, Ms. Rowe. You made the audience laugh. But you forgot who was holding the script. Cassidy blinked. This isn't how things work. You tricked us. I tested you, Elijah said, eyes narrowing. You built a palace of pretense on the backs of underpaid staff, exploiting every act of kindness as weakness, and now the lights are on, the curtains are pulled, and everyone sees what lies behind that polished facade. From the hallway, Melissa Brooks stepped in with quiet purpose, holding a folder. She moved beside Elijah and opened it. Inside were bank statements, emails, and testimonies from past employees. The proof of what Dean had stolen, of tips skimmed, of undocumented firings, of hush-hush cash deals that robbed loyal workers of their dignity. Elijah turned to Dean. You enjoyed watching others crawl, didn't you? Dean opened his mouth, but no words came. Elijah continued. You bullied, you lied, you climbed off the backs of people who only wanted to serve with integrity. But every empire built on fear is eventually swallowed by justice. And tonight, it's your turn. He gave a nod. One of his team members entered the room with a sealed envelope. It was addressed to Dean Whitaker. Dean took it hesitantly, opened it, and staggered back. Termination? He rasped. Effective immediately? This is ridiculous. No, Mr. Whitaker, Elijah said with piercing calm. This is overdue. Gasps rippled across the room. Some of the staff members outside the glass doors peered in, eyes wide with disbelief and growing pride. Cassidy stepped forward, desperate. You can't dismantle what I built. Meridian is my life. And yet you never realized, Elijah said softly, that a restaurant's soul isn't in its marble floors or gold-leafed menus. It's in the way it treats its people. He turned to Melissa. Would you escort Ms. Brooks to the main floor? I believe the staff should hear what's happening. They deserve to know the truth. Melissa nodded, but before she left, she looked directly at Cassidy Rowe, the same woman who had called her replaceable just 2 nights before. We're not invisible anymore, she said, voice steady, and with that she opened the door, ready to let the truth spill into the very halls where injustice once reigned. As Melissa Brooks stepped into the grand dining room, her heart pounded, not with fear but with a courage she hadn't known she carried until now. Behind her trailed Elijah Morgan, no longer in disguise, followed by several members of his executive team. The restaurant, dressed to impress the Harrison Group, fell into stunned silence. Every server, busboy, hostess, and even the pianist froze mid-motion. Patrons put down their forks. The wine stopped pouring. The chandeliers no longer glittered with pride. They merely reflected the tension that electrified the air. Melissa cleared her throat. Her voice, though soft, carried more power than a microphone. May I have your attention, please? All eyes turned. The man many of you saw being mocked, dismissed, humiliated these past few nights, she said, gesturing toward Elijah, is Elijah Morgan, chairman of Morgan Enterprises, founder of the Morgan Foundation. Gasps, audible gasps. A wine glass shattered at a distant table. A woman clutched her pearls. Somewhere, a fork hit the floor. And he's not here to dine anymore, Melissa continued, her voice steady. He's here to change everything. Elijah stepped forward, calm, composed, radiating a silent authority that required no theatrics. For the past 3 evenings, he began, I've walked through those doors not as a CEO, but as a test, not of food, but of character. He looked around, his gaze sweeping across shocked servers and pale-faced guests. I wanted to see who among you had integrity when no one important was watching. Who could serve with kindness when the reward wasn't obvious? And who among the leadership? His eyes locked onto Cassidy Rowe, now standing in the shadows near the bar, saw power as permission to belittle, to exploit, and to destroy. A murmur rippled through the room. Staff began whispering to each other. Several looked toward Cassidy with disgust. Dean was nowhere to be seen, having disappeared moments earlier, his termination letter still crumpled in his fist. I've seen enough, Elijah declared. Effective immediately, Meridian is no longer under the control of its former leadership. Morgan Enterprises now holds the majority stake in Prestige Dining Concepts, and this establishment will close for full restructuring. Cries of disbelief from some of the elite diners. Cheers from the back-of-house staff. One cook in the open kitchen dropped his ladle and clapped. Others followed, then the servers, then the sommelier. The applause spread not because of a corporate takeover, but because someone had finally seen them. Elijah raised a hand. Silence returned. To those who treated others with respect, even when it seemed they had nothing to offer, I see you. You are the foundation of what this place will become. He turned to Melissa and nodded. You'll help lead the transition. To the stunned guests, he added, your meal tonight is complimentary, but your experience here, it should leave you full, not with food, but with awareness. The message was unmistakable. The lines had been redrawn. Power had shifted, not with shouting or revenge, but with clarity and truth. As Elijah left the dining floor, the door behind him slowly closed, not as an end, but as the beginning of a new chapter. By dawn, the story had exploded. The headlines hit like lightning across every major news outlet. Billionaire Elijah Morgan exposes classism and racism at high-end restaurant. Meridian falls from grace as CEO, reveals discrimination through undercover investigation. Justice in a suit, Elijah Morgan's social experiment rocks the hospitality industry. Every news anchor in the city led with the story. Social media erupted. Videos from the past 3 nights, recorded secretly by guests' waitstaff, even security cameras were stitched into viral compilations. Clips of Dean Whitaker sneering, Cassidy Rowe smirking, Melissa Brooks offering kindness, Elijah Morgan standing with quiet dignity as insults rained down. The public was livid. Talk shows, podcasts, TikTok influencers, everyone weighed in. Americans from coast to coast saw in Elijah not just a billionaire, but a symbol. A man who used power not for vanity, but for accountability. Hashtags like and respect the underdog and justice served trended for days. The New York Times called it a masterclass in humility and corporate ethics. USA Today ran a piece titled "One Man's Disguise, an Industry's Reckoning." CNN aired an exclusive roundtable on systemic classism in fine dining, with Melissa Brooks featured as a special guest. But the most impactful ripple wasn't in headlines. It was in people's hearts. That morning across the city, a young busboy at a rival restaurant quit after seeing how staff were mistreated, saying, "I'm not working for a Dean clone." A retired teacher brought flowers to a local diner waitress and simply said, "Thank you for your grace, you're seen." A struggling single mom emailed Morgan Foundation's website, not for money, but to say thank you for reminding the world what dignity looks like. Back at Meridian, now closed to the public, the doors remained shut. The staff, however, were summoned to a private meeting. Elijah's team stood before them. "Every one of you will be paid during this transition," one representative announced. "If you choose to stay, you'll receive retraining and benefits. If not, we'll assist with placements elsewhere." Gasps, tears, applause. Then came the most shocking part. "For those who lost tips to prior management," the rep added, "we've audited the records. Every stolen dollar will be reimbursed in full." Melissa stood quietly at the back, tears threatening her composure. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt small, voiceless, invisible. She wasn't just part of a story now. She was part of a movement. And this was only the beginning. When Cassidy Rowe walked into her office that morning, the silence was deafening. No phones ringing, no staff rushing, no ambient clinking of crystal glasses or murmured compliments from high-profile guests. Just stillness. She closed the door behind her and looked around at the once pristine space, now stripped of its luxury. The elegant floral arrangements were gone. Her leather chair replaced by a modest one. Her nameplate had been removed from the desk. A simple envelope sat where her daily briefing used to be. Inside, a contract detailing her new role as silent partner. 15% ownership, no decision-making power, no influence over branding, service, or staff. The rest had been acquired by King Hospitality. She stared at the signature line for a long time, her fingers trembling. Everything she had built, every favor, every ruthless choice had been reduced to this, a name on paper, a relic of the past. On her desk was also a personal note from Elijah Morgan. Appearances may impress, but character reveals, rebuild, or disappear. It hit harder than any headline. Meanwhile, Dean Whitaker, once the smug maitre d' who lorded over staff with a smirk and swagger, was living through his own reckoning. After his explosive meltdown in front of Elijah and the Harrison Group, no restaurant in the city would return his calls. His severance envelope, handed to him with the finality of a judge's gavel, sat unopened on his kitchen counter. He had tried to spin the story on social media, claiming he was set up, taken out of context, a victim of a smear campaign. No one believed him. The comments flooded in. So you called a black elder street trash on camera. That wasn't out of context. You weren't fired because of who he was. You were fired because of who you are. Dean's followers plummeted. His private group chats went dead. His name became synonymous with elitism and prejudice. With nowhere left to go, he swallowed his pride and applied for a manager position at a chain steakhouse 2 counties over. Rejected. He tried again, this time as a server at an airport restaurant. Accepted. On his first day, he was told to memorize the menu, clean up spilled ketchup, and take orders from travelers who barely glanced at his name tag. It was the first time in years anyone had spoken to him like he was ordinary. And for once, he had no title, no power, no audience, only silence. The kind that forces reflection or regret. Back at what was once Meridian, now in the early stages of its transformation, Elijah Morgan watched from a quiet corner table as the renovation crew peeled down the gold lettering above the door. He didn't smile, but he nodded, once, firmly. The old name no longer fit. The new name, King's Table, would soon take its place, and the city, still buzzing from the truth that had come to light, would never look at hospitality or justice the same way again. 6 weeks after the explosive reveal at Meridian, a quiet buzz rippled through the riverfront district. Where once sat an abandoned property, now stood something extraordinary. Emma's Kitchen. Its grand opening wasn't a spectacle of celebrities and red carpets, but something far more meaningful. The line outside was filled with families, veterans, teachers, and students. People who had never felt welcome in fine dining before. Lorenzo Bennett, no longer just a chef but now majority owner, stood at the front door, welcoming guests with a humble smile and a clean apron. The scarred look of exhaustion that once haunted his eyes had been replaced by something different. Hope. Inside, the space had been transformed. Exposed brick walls, warm wood finishes, an open-concept kitchen where guests could watch the action unfold. And in the center of it all, a long communal table carved from reclaimed oak, symbolizing togetherness. The menu was elegant yet affordable. Braised lamb with rosemary just sat beside house-made mac and cheese. Artisan sourdough next to fried green tomatoes. A kid's menu designed by Emma herself included super heart soup, her favorite. Melissa Brooks, freshly returned from her first semester at the Culinary Institute, floated between tables in her new role as sous chef in training. She wore a white coat with her name embroidered on it, not with ego, but with pride earned, and she glowed. During the soft launch, she had helped develop the concept of interactive cooking nights, where kids and parents could learn how to cook together. The first one was booked solid for a month. Later that evening, as the kitchen calmed and the final guests lingered over dessert, Lorenzo gathered his team. "I want you all to know something," he said, his voice steady. "This restaurant didn't start with a business plan. It started with a girl in need of heart surgery and a stranger in tattered clothes who saw more than most people ever do." He glanced at Melissa. "And it continues with people like you, who cook, clean, serve, and smile. Not for applause, but because you believe that food and dignity should never be separated." Applause filled the space, not thunderous but genuine. In the crowd, Emma twirled around, her hair in playful pigtails, clutching a small notebook. She had written out her own version of the night's special, Magic chicken with courage sauce. She'd said it was inspired by her dad. Across town in a quiet apartment, Elijah Morgan received a simple text. Opening was a success. Emma's smile says it all. Lorenzo. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he poured himself a cup of tea, walked to the window, and watched the city breathe. From chaos had come creation. From injustice had risen integrity. And from a place once ruled by ego and appearances now stood a new standard, where humanity came first. The next page will take you deeper into Melissa's journey as she inspires the next generation, and into a surprising reunion with someone no one expected to return. Weeks turned into months, and Emma's kitchen blossomed into more than just a restaurant. It became a hub, a space where stories were shared, dreams were sparked, and second chances were served alongside every meal. Melissa Brooks had grown into her role with striking grace. She wasn't just cooking anymore, she was mentoring, teaching. Every Tuesday morning, a group of high school students from underserved neighborhoods would gather in the open demo kitchen. Some were shy, others hardened by life already. But when Melissa spoke, they listened. She'd start every class the same way. What's the most important ingredient in any dish? They'd throw out answers. Salt, love, butter, time. She'd smile. The answer is care. Without care, none of the others matter. Her empathy, born from years of being overlooked and underpaid, had become her greatest asset. One afternoon, after her class had wrapped and the students had filed out, leaving behind laughter and the scent of garlic confit, Melissa stood wiping the counters when the door chimed. She looked up. Standing there, dressed modestly but unmistakably clean, was someone she hadn't seen since the night that changed everything. Cassidy Rowe, the former queen of Meridian, the woman who once ruled with an iron smile and a chilled heart. Melissa blinked, stunned. Cassidy looked different. No longer airbrushed perfection, her hair was tied back simply. No designer handbag, no icy glare, just a woman trying to find her footing. "Melissa," Cassidy said quietly, "may I come in?" Melissa hesitated. Everything in her wanted to protect this space, this sanctuary, but something deeper urged her to listen. She nodded. "Yeah, come in." They sat at the community table, the one Emma had helped varnish with her tiny hands. Cassidy looked around the restaurant, eyes scanning the warmth, the laughter in the background, the little girl giggling with a young line cook at the back. "It's beautiful," Cassidy said, her voice brittle. "This place has heart, real heart." Melissa crossed her arms. "That was always the problem at Meridian. It had shine, but no soul." Cassidy nodded slowly. "I know. I created that place, and in the end, it destroyed me too." For a moment, silence. Then Cassidy reached into her purse and pulled out a letter. "I got offered a new project," she said. "A community food venture, funded by the King Foundation. They asked if I wanted to co-lead. I said I'd only do it if I could learn from someone who actually understood what food is supposed to mean." She slid the letter across the table. "Melissa, I'm asking you to mentor me." The room stood still. Melissa looked at the letter, then back at the woman who once nearly ruined her future. This was justice, not the kind that humiliates, but the kind that humbles. "I'll think about it," Melissa said softly. "But if we do this, we do it my way. No power games, no fancy masks." Cassidy offered the faintest smile. "Agreed." Outside, the sun filtered in through the windows, bathing the room in gold. Inside, a new kind of alliance began, not one born from status, but from redemption. A few weeks later, on a crisp spring afternoon, a soft breeze carried the scent of rosemary and baked bread from Emma's kitchen into the open streets of Riverfront Park. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with a comforting rhythm. Pans clattered, laughter echoed, and the smell of caramelized onions lingered in the air. Melissa Brooks stood near the window, watching the city move. She was no longer the girl counting tips to survive. She was a woman building futures. Her phone buzzed with a simple message. "Come to the park bench by the fountain, EM." She didn't need a second guess, Elijah Morgan. Moments later, she found him sitting beneath a blooming dogwood tree, dressed in the same kind of humble clothes he wore the very first night at Meridian. But this time there was no question who he was, not to her, not to anyone. "Evening, Melissa," he greeted, his voice as calm and grounding as ever. She sat beside him, eyes shining with respect. "You always did prefer the quiet corners." Elijah smiled. "Loud spaces are often filled with empty noise, but in silence, you can hear a man's soul." They sat for a while just listening. Children played nearby. A violinist performed faintly at the far end of the park. The world kept spinning. "I came to say goodbye," Elijah finally said. Melissa turned to him, startled. "Goodbye? Why?" "My work here is done," he said simply. "This city knows now what kindness looks like, what character means. You showed them, Lorenzo showed them, even Cassidy in her own way." He looked down at his weathered hands, then back to her. "I've spent my life building empires," he continued. "But the things I'm proudest of, they're the quiet ones. A kitchen with no shouting, a server who stands up, a child who gets to grow up." Melissa felt a tightness in her chest. "Where will you go?" "Wherever I'm needed," he said. "There are still too many places where power tramples people and appearances dictate worth. I'll go in plain clothes, sit where I'm not expected, and I'll keep watching." He stood slowly, the years evident in his bones but not in his spirit. "One last thing," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. He handed her a small, leather-bound notebook. "What is this?" Melissa asked. "Blueprints, dreams, ideas. It's everything I've ever wanted to build but couldn't finish alone." He smiled. "Now you can." She opened it briefly, pages filled with community restaurant sketches, notes on food security, mentorship programs, even a handwritten quote. "True wealth is not stored in vaults, but in the hearts you leave full when you're gone." Tears welled in Melissa's eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan." He touched her shoulder gently. "No, thank you, for seeing me when others wouldn't." Then, with the same grace he always carried, Elijah Morgan turned and walked down the winding path, cane in hand, disappearing slowly among the trees and sunlight. She watched him go, heart full, and though the man left no entourage, no press, no applause, his legacy would echo through every child fed, every chef trained, and every soul reminded that dignity is not worn on the outside, it is lived. In the weeks that followed Elijah Morgan's quiet departure, the ripples of his presence only grew wider. News outlets that had once overlooked him now scrambled to piece together the full story. "The man in rags who owned the room," read one headline. "Elijah Morgan, the billionaire who tested America's soul," said another. His name became synonymous with integrity, empathy, and a style of leadership rooted not in control, but in conviction. But it wasn't just headlines that changed. City councils across the country began revisiting policies related to restaurant worker rights and tip protection. Several culinary schools created scholarships under his name. The Culinary Justice Coalition was formed, funded quietly by the King Foundation, to investigate unethical hospitality practices nationwide. And King's Table? It became more than a restaurant. It became a model. Documentaries were filmed. University business schools taught case studies on its turnaround. But most importantly, everyday people visited. Not for status, not for selfies, but because they felt seen. The motto over the door, "Excellence for All," wasn't just a slogan. It was a promise kept. At Emma's kitchen, Lorenzo stood proudly at the center of a packed kitchen, training his fourth group of apprentices, former inmates, foster kids, veterans, and single mothers. They weren't just learning to cook, they were reclaiming their stories. And Melissa? She had become a rising culinary star, not because of her fame, but because of her heart. She launched a program pairing underprivileged high school students with restaurant internships. Each student mentored, trained, and guided to believe they belonged in spaces once closed to them. But amidst all the recognition and rebirth, one moment stood out above all. 6 months after Elijah's final goodbye, the President of the United States awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. He didn't attend the ceremony. Instead, the medal was accepted by Melissa Brooks and Lorenzo Tate on his behalf. Standing before the nation, Melissa addressed the crowd. Elijah Morgan didn't want credit. He wanted change. He didn't ask for applause. He asked us to do better, to be better. He believed in people before they believed in themselves. That is the measure of a great man. The audience rose in a thunderous standing ovation, and somewhere, maybe in a quiet diner in another town or a crowded street in another city, a man with a worn coat and sharp eyes watched from afar. Still listening, still waiting for the moment when the world would show its true self. Because Elijah Morgan didn't build empires to be remembered. He built them so others would never be forgotten. The story of Joseph King imparts profound lessons about compassion, respect, and the power of transformation through genuine actions. Despite being a man of great wealth and status, Joseph donned the appearance of a poor, homeless individual and entered a high-end restaurant to test the character of its patrons and staff. This act showed that a person's worth is not defined by their outward appearance. Joseph's actions helped some individuals rediscover their true values while exposing the flaws in the systems that rewarded superficiality and cruelty. His challenge was a reminder that goodness, decency, and integrity are the true measures of a person's character. In our daily lives, regardless of age, we have the ability to make a difference. Never judge a person based on their appearance, and remember that acts of kindness, honesty, and respect will always be returned. We may not change the world all at once, but each small act of goodness, every sincere smile contributes to a better society. At any age, it's essential to hold on to the values of compassion, fairness, and integrity. These qualities are timeless and serve as the foundation for creating stronger, more supportive communities. In the end, the greatest wealth is not in material possessions, but in the love, kindness, and respect we give to one another. Let us all remember that we can be agents of change, no matter where we are in life, as long as we approach others with understanding and kindness.